Keep it pushing to one of the best matchups of week 2, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going up to Detroit in a rowdy environment at Ford Field against the Detroit Lions. That's why it's on the road, presented by Honda. Dreams are unstoppable. And to help us preview Lions Buccaneers, our friend Daryl Moose Johnston will be on the call in Detroit. Moose, good to see you, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
So a couple things. First of all, you've already seen the Bucs this year. You were on the call for Tampa Bay, Washington last week. But on top of that, you called Bucs Lions last year. I know I'm going back a little bit, but way back in week 6. I'm curious for your perspective. You go back to week 6 last year. The Lions were kind of a test for the Buccaneers. They did not pass that one. The Lions won 20-6, a fairly easy win for them. And now the Buccaneers, they go on this run. They win the division. They win a playoff game, looking like a much improved team, and they looked phenomenal last week. What's your impression of the way the Buccaneers have sort of grown, evolved, gotten better here over the last calendar year or so?
Yeah, I think right around that time that they played last year in week 6, that was kind of the start of a little bit of a big bump in the road for Tampa Bay. I think they went 1-5, 1-6 during the course of the middle of the season, and I think that was right around that time when that started. I actually went back and watched that game today, and it looked very different than the playoff game. Both teams, obviously, from week 6 through to the divisional round, much improved, and I really felt that. One of the areas that Tampa Bay struggled in, not just last season, but the last 2 years is running the football. They've been the lowest ranked team in the NFL when it comes to, total rushing yards and yards per carry. But in that playoff game, they ran the ball very effectively against that Detroit front. So, I think it was a big test for them last year. I don't think anybody gave, Tampa Bay any chance, even going into the playoffs, against Philadelphia in the wild card round. And then they end up with the football in their possession, down 8 with a little under 2 minutes to go to kind of, go in and push a tie and maybe get to overtime in the divisional round. So that created a lot of positives coming off the season last year. And then I think what's really energized the whole organization, not just on the offensive side, but this is kind of built in to the defensive side when you talk about the complementary component in the game of football. But Liam Cohen coming in and Jason Light and his group really kind of solidifying that offensive line on the interior and them starting to really focus on the run game. And this comes off that LA Rams tree and the Sean McVay tree when you talk about, from Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, down to Matt LaFleur, down to Kevin O'Connell, now it's Liam Cohen. And you see a lot of similarities there. The guys really love the offense that they're doing. I think that it gives them, more opportunities, to do different things. And then you get to play off the Chris Godwin component. Baker has a lot more control at the line of scrimmage. So we get down to Tampa Bay last week. And one of the first questions I had to ask Todd Bowles was, early in the off season, the first time they came together as a team, he said, we're raising our expectations. We're not talking about winning the division. We're talking about winning the whole thing. And they really got into the Super Bowl talk and the Super Bowl conversation right away. And it was kind of like, well, why not us? Obviously you've got your Kansas Cities and your San Franciscos, but I think they felt last season, the way they finished up and how they played through the playoffs, why not us this season? Because there is a lot of positivity, through that facility when you're around them.
I know you don't win anything in week 2, but I mean, we just talked about it. Going back to last year in the regular season and the postseason, they can't get past the Lions. Even after a nice win on Sunday, Vegas still sees this as a 7.5-point game in the Lions' favor. Like, people still clearly think of the Lions as a much better team than the Buccaneers, at least on paper. We talk so much, narrative's a big part of it, but this feels like a measuring stick game. Like, what can this game show the Buccaneers about who they are? How do you feel about the concept of a measuring stick, in the sense of, there's a lot of season left no matter what happens, but having an early opportunity to kind of measure yourself against a truly great team?
Well, because they played in the divisional round last year, I don't know if the measuring stick component, is really the true one. If they were a team that was trying to get to the playoffs, I think that works out a little better. Hey, let's see where we are compared to one of the NFC Championship game participants last season. But because Detroit was there, with a little under 2 minutes to go, with the football in their possession, with an opportunity to score 8 points and tie it up, I think that they're very confident in that. I think that this is more of a gauge, and you hear a little bit of it from Dan Campbell as well. Knowing last weekend against the Rams, they did not play their best football. We just got to get better each week. And I think it's more, if it's a measuring stick, it's more of a measuring stick to where are you right now, because I think that the way that you approach the preseason, and there's not a lot of time for the starters. There's a few teams that will do that. Andy Reid, still has, Patrick Mahomes and a lot of the starters out there, but it's something in the NFL that you don't see, very often with teams. The starting groups are not getting a lot of snaps. So you're going to have some bumps in the road, through the first month of the season. And so this is really looking at that progression. And I think when you talk about these two teams, I think it's more of an internal measuring stick than it is a measuring stick as to where do we sit in the landscape of the NFC right now. So I think really for both of these teams, coming off of a game last week where I'm sure if you ask Dan Campbell, wasn't real clean. We won the game. That's the most important thing, but there's a lot of areas we need to get better in. If you were to talk to Todd Bowles, happy with some of the areas that we showed improvement from last season. But that was a team that has a brand new head coach and a brand new staff and a rookie quarterback. And they're just starting that journey. They're just starting that process to become a good football team again. So we should have handled our business there. So I think really for Todd Bowles and for Dan Campbell, this is more of a measuring stick as to where are we at with our team and where we want to be. How close are we to the standard that we hold ourselves accountable to, and where we want to be when we get to the month of December and January?
You are the perfect person to ask this question to, a legendary fullback, lead blocker for Emmitt Smith for so many yards, touchdowns, wins. I know they didn't do it the same way that y'all used to do it in Dallas, but how do you feel watching the Detroit Lions go into overtime of that game? 6 runs out of 7 plays, just mashing the ball downfield for a game-winning touchdown. I mean, a very fun throwback to a different era of football, it felt like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really, I love the first play call, the end around. I thought that was a great play call by Ben Johnson. You expect everybody to be amped up at that time. I loved a little bit of the motion that they incorporated to it. It looked like it was going to the right, and then you get the end around coming the opposite direction. And then you hit him with David Montgomery on the next play. And when you rip off a 21-yard run in overtime, everybody talks about the hot hand. It's not much harder than it is right then. So yeah, just keep giving David the ball, get him behind that big offensive line. It reminded me when we came out of halftime of our second Super Bowl, and Buffalo had done some really good things defensively to really impact our run game between the tackles. And that was really kind of where our bread and butter was back at that time. We were not really a big perimeter run team. We were more between the tackles. And the way they were doing it, it was going to force us to kind of get more out on the edge. And we had a play that we'd run about a month before, and it was something that was in our repertoire, but we hadn't really repped it a whole lot. So at halftime of the Super Bowl, we kind of sat down and went through everything. Here's what they're doing. Here's how that will impact the blocks and create some angles. And eventually they've got to get out of this. And then we'll get back to what we do between the tackles. Well, Buffalo never got out of it. And if you remember that opening drive of the second half, it looked like the same play going down the field. Emmitt right, Emmitt left, Emmitt left, Emmitt right, Emmitt right. That's exactly what it was. It was power, and it was either power right or power left. And Buffalo just never adjusted to it. And that drive reminded me a lot of that, especially once they got down in tight, because it really looked like it was just a duo scheme. And it was just that Detroit offensive line coming off the ball and knocking people back. And it was like 3 times in a row. It looked like the exact same play call before David Montgomery got into the end zone. So I love that. I love that. But I really think it all started off with that first play call, that end around that really kind of got everybody kind of back on their heels a little bit, and then you just get downhill on them.
Which, and it's not like this is new in the sense that, I mean, Detroit has had a fun offense for a couple of years now, and they've got all these great pieces on the offensive line, but between Jameson Williams now coming along and obviously Jahmyr Gibbs, I mean, we know they can do all of the more traditional power stuff, run right at you. They've got these great possession receivers like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta. But that element of speed in addition to it, I mean, if this keeps going the way it's going and Jameson Williams can do this consistently, I mean, is there a higher ceiling for an offense that's already one of the best in the league?
I think so. And I think that's why everybody was excited with the performance of Jameson Williams. And especially when you're going to take Amon-Ra St. Brown out of the game. And from a statistical standpoint, I think I read recently this week that was the lowest number of targets, catches, and yards he had going all the way back to a game in which he got pulled from the game when he had a concussion and only had one target, one catch. So you played the entire 60 minutes, and obviously the Rams focused on not letting Amon-Ra St. Brown be that guy that disrupts it. And then Jameson Williams just takes over the game. And just during the course of training camp, I followed Detroit all the way through training camp, just to get an idea how things were going. And one of the things that was a feature about every third or fourth day was the progress of Jameson Williams. And one of the things that everybody talked about was the patience of Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes and the organization. And I thought that was awesome, because here comes a guy, you move up to take him in the draft. He had an ACL the year before. He comes in, doesn't do a lot, gets caught up in the new gambling policy with the NFL the following year, misses 6 games, then comes back in. So you're 2 years into it, and you moved up to 12 to get this guy, and you still don't have anything. And they were not down on him. They were not critical of him. They just, hey, sometimes we got to learn some tough life lessons. That's one of the things I love about Dan Campbell is it's football and life together. And, it's like a Ted Lasso episode, football is life. And, you get into that and you talk about the patience and the opportunity to become the player we knew you were. And he does that in the opening game. But the biggest thing is, and we had it on the other side in our game last week when Tampa Bay just took Terry McLaurin out of the game. And Washington doesn't have that number 2 yet. And so is it Austin Eckler? Who's it going to be? And they've got to get that sorted out, because I think that was one of the biggest things that Tampa Bay exposed Washington to right now, is if you can take Terry McLaurin out of the game, you got a really good chance of winning it, because there's really nobody there right now to step in and fill that void. Detroit has that guy now. And it was something they always talked about, who's going to be our 3, who's going to be that big X receiver. They brought in Tim Patrick. They've got Allen Robinson. They've got some options that are there. But when you've got a number 2 that can do what Jameson Williams did for you, that's such a huge, huge plus for that offense.
That Dallas Cowboys team you brought up, Super Bowl 28. I knew the basic gist, but I wanted to get it exactly right. Outscored the Bills 24-0 after halftime en route to that championship. I have a feeling if the Lions can replicate that, they'll be very happy. I'm so excited for just a great early season test between two teams with a lot of high hopes for the season. Moose, I hope you have a great call, man. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, enjoyed it.